Thank you all for coming out on this rainy day. It just started to rain right as the event was started, so we have a hardy group of folks here. As Chris mentioned, I am a professor at UC San Diego, and I'm also a faculty member of the 21st Century China Center there, which is a think tank research center that focuses on China as well as U.S.-China relations and tries to provide robust, timely, scholarly insight into the evolving relationship between our two countries. And so I'm going to briefly talk about briefly introduce the backgrounds of our panelists here, and then I'll give you a little rundown of where we're going to go. We're going to have a chat here among us with some questions to kind of get the conversation started, and then we'll open it up to all of your questions. So be thinking about those as we get through the panel. First, we have David Hochschild, who is the chair of the California Energy Commission, appointed by Governor Newsom in 2019. And he has a long career both in government, starting out in the city of San Francisco with a special assistant focused on solar issues, and then the San Francisco Public Utility Commissions, as well as a long history in the solar industry, and so brings a wealth of experience on this, and has also been very involved in the California-China Cooperations Initiative. So we'll be hearing about that from David today. And then next we have Dr. Nan Zhou, who is a senior scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And Nan has been involved in quite a few initiatives, both looking at China as well as looking at worldwide decarbonization patterns. And she was most recently a lead author on IPCC's Sixth Assessment Report Working Group 3 chapter on mitigation. And she was also very involved in and directed one of the U.S.-China Clean Energy Research Centers that was inaugurated under the Obama administration. So we'll hear a little bit about some of those today. And then finally, we have Frank Girardo, who is the Senior Communications Director of BYD Ride, BYD's North American spinoff. And for those that don't know, BYD is very well known and electric vehicle and vehicle manufacturer on the Fortune 500 list, Times Magazine top innovative companies, et cetera. And before joining BYD, Frank was a distinguished journalist, investigative journalist on these topics. So with those introductions in mind and the esteemed panel that we have here, before we get to learning about all of their insights and their thoughts on this very complex relationship between California, the U.S., and China on climate, I thought I'd set the scene a little bit for folks to give us some context of where we see ourselves now in APEC with the Biden-Xi meeting concluding today. So first of all, for those that didn't know, last night was actually the big news in U.S.-China because that was the release of the Sunnyland Statement between U.S. and China, which was surprisingly detailed, and we'll get into it, I'm sure, in the conversation tonight about what was agreed upon between the two sides. And then just 2 weeks ago, we had Governor Newsom's very high-profile visit to China, spending a whole week meeting with everyone from President Xi on down, talking exclusively on climate, and we'll also be getting into some of those details here today. So the U.S.-China are clearly on the global stage when it comes to climate change issues, and in terms of the Paris Agreement and how implementing the Paris Agreement, U.S. and China have been very critical to both establishing it as well as moving the ball forward. And this has really been, I would say, punctuated by a number of really important announcements in the lead up to Paris in 2014 with a very important high-profile joint announcement between China and the U.S., which included commitments as well as clean energy initiatives and a variety of other issues. And then in 2017, the U.S. withdrew from the Paris Agreement, and China stepped in and took more unilateral actions and took leadership on climate change issues, as well as, let's not forget, U.S. subnational governments like California stepping in to fill that void. And then since 2021, we have a renewed emphasis at the federal level and lots of legislation being passed, as well as some renewed agreements and discussion between U.S. and China, most notably the Glasgow Agreement in 2021, which set forth a number of working groups as well as an emphasis on strengthening near-term climate ambition. And then, as I mentioned, the Sunnyland Statement that was just announced yesterday, which we'll get into in the panel. California sticks out, of course, with having being a leader within the United States on clean energy and climate issues. California has a 100% clean energy carbon neutrality goal by 2045 and a 100% new sales of zero emissions vehicle by 2035, which we'll get into, I'm sure, today. But at the same time, of course, we know that cooperation on climate change is not a given, and it is not always proceeded at a rapid pace, particularly because U.S. and China tensions have been mounting since over the last few years. And these really stem across a variety of really contentious issues in the relationship, which really prompt the question of what is the extent that the U.S. and China and California can cooperate on climate change, and what are other issues that may get in the way. And so just to briefly mention some of those that folks will be familiar with: trade, as clean energy sectors get more large in terms of economic size, the impetus to engage in different forms of trade policies to build up domestic industries and prevent imports from other countries has become much more salient. We have industrial policy concerns both in the U.S. and China. The U.S. now very much behind creating industrial pathways in key clean energy technologies in areas where China is currently quite dominant. We also have security issues, energy security, which is being framed as part of U.S.-China relations, particularly thinking about critical minerals and other inputs to clean energy, and then technology issues. So some of these clean energy technologies are advanced technologies, and we have a very complex technology battle and race engaged currently underway between U.S. and China. So what's at stake for cooperation? Why do we need to have this kind of event? Certainly enhancing ambition on climate commitments, both for the Paris Agreement and outside of that, and ensuring that there's implementation of those commitments is quite crucial. There's also a need to maintain sufficient pace and availability of clean energy products for localities to deploy those technologies in order to meet those ambitious goals. There are win-win cooperative areas in terms of technology, information sharing, and we'll hear about potentially about some of those potential technology cooperative areas like CCUS. But competition is also a very salient feature of the relationship because there are certainly arguments to be made that competition may speed the transition even faster. And so we'll be talking about all of these issues tonight from the US-China perspective, as well as from a key lens on California. So with that as a backdrop, I wanted to kind of kick us off with first going to David to talk about, what are California's climate goals? What are those going to be most challenging to meet, and how do they align with US national goals?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having us. Good to be here. And I'm just back from China. Toured 5 cities in support of the governor's trip there. Let's begin with just a quick aerial tour of what is happening here in California clean energy, because it's actually a source of great hope, I think, in a sort of dark moment for the world that we're in right now. We just hit last month 27% of new vehicle sales being electric. And that's worth a round of applause, by the way. That's a great milestone. We were at 5% when Governor Newsom took office. So we're on a track now to soon break 50% and be the first state in the United States to get the majority of our new vehicle sales from electric. Tesla just surpassed Toyota to be the best-selling car in the state of California. And we're at about 60% of our electricity coming from clean, carbon-free sources. So really, alternative energy is the wrong word to use to describe renewables in California. And we're expecting next year to get to 2/3 of our electricity from carbon-free. And then the governor just signed a law to require 90% by 2035. So really what you're seeing is this sort of twin track of greening the electric grid, through which the future is going to flow. It's not going to go through pipes. It's going to go through electric lines. And then the electrification of almost everything, the most important of that being vehicles, but there's also a lot of concurrent electrification We're seeing here the Caltrain line to Silicon Valley is converting, will be electrified by next year, and a lot of movement as well on all-electric new construction. So I think there's been a great nexus with China on these issues. China's actually, they deserve great credit for advancing both renewables and electric vehicles. And there's been, of course, some trade and the Tesla factory in Shanghai and other areas where we're seeing work together. And then I guess the final area that is, I think, of great interest to both California and China is offshore wind. So we just formally established the state goal last year to do 25 gigawatts of offshore wind. Our peak electric demand in California is 52 gigawatts today, so that's a very sizable chunk of our peak demand. And China's been leading on this. In fact, half of the global capacity of offshore wind in the world has been installed in China. So that was actually a lot of our visit there is leaning on that. So I think there's a lot of these issues we're going to lean in together, and I think we will both enjoy an additional dividend of this clean energy effort, which is reducing our reliance on imported fossil fuels from some difficult parts of the world. And I think that's good for both California, United States, and China.
Yeah, thanks. So if we could drill down a little bit more deeply, what do international cooperative efforts between California and China look like? And David and Nan, feel free to jump in here.
Yeah, well, just at a high level, I just kind of acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is that, the Biden administration deserves huge credit for passing the Inflation Reduction Act. But one of the features of that is that there's a big effort to now onshore and bring back many things we were buying from China, including wind turbines, solar panels, batteries. So industrial policy and climate policy are now inextricably intertwined here in the United States. That is creating some tension. I think there's still a lot of areas to collaborate, and certainly establishing these joint goals and joint commitments is a big part of that. I think on offshore wind, we have a lot to learn from China. On high-speed rail, we have a lot to learn from China. I will say, I think we have some lessons we can share with China on stationary energy storage. And this was a major focus of my trip over there. China is building all these clean energy sources, but they're still building new coal capacity, still, every day. And what they're not doing is building stationary energy storage. And we are the fastest growing energy storage market in the world. We had 250 megawatts grid connected in 2019. By the end of next month, we'll be at 8,700 megawatts. That's a 3,500% increase in 4 years. That's equivalent to 4 Diablo Canyon nuclear plants, and it's working. The storage fleet is performing very well. It's helping keep the lights on. And that's something that we would love to support happening more in China. I think it's good for their grid and certainly better than coal.
Yeah. Nan, what, from your perspective of some successful clean energy ventures with China, what do you think has worked and why, and where do you think opportunities are?
I think on the policy front, there's a lot of area we can collaborate. And then in the past 35 years that this China program in our lab, and we have been working with China on many topics, issues. We always introduce California experience as a best practice. For example, we decoupled, right? That was before we had electrification policy. Electricity consumption per capita in the California decoupled from economic growth, right? That's something I think our Chinese collaborators were very fascinated because it's a really common belief, and if you have more GDP growth, and then your electricity consumption will go up and up forever. But that was not the case in California, and that was a result from really rigorous policy standards, codes, and a lot of these, and really innovative policy we put in place. So we always introduce those to our Chinese colleagues. And even today, we are pioneering, right? We're experimenting all kinds of new target. We do run into failures, and there's a lot of lessons learned, like including the power shortage outage we had a couple years ago. But that actually shed a lot of light for Chinese colleagues, because when they're experiencing similar problem as they go through their energy transition, right, moving away from coal and then installing more renewable, they now install more renewable and electricity generation than fossil fuel, even though they still have a lot of those. But they do have problems when there's a snowstorm and when there's a heat wave. There's all these issues they're running into that kind of set them back and to coal, right? That's a recent issue. And while they're installing more renewable, they're also installing more coal power generation because they feel more secure. And also considering all the Russia war and uncertainties. And so that's one of the reasons they're actually adding more. But actually, and they could consider, instead of building more coal power plant, they could have more storage, right? And they could have more demand response. And that's something, and they haven't really tried. But again, California offers great and experience and lessons learned, all this knowledge to them. That's what we're being also introducing to our Chinese colleagues. So I think this policy, and in terms of appliance standards or building codes, we now have net zero energy building and targets, which China hasn't set up, which will be very important and for them to achieve carbon neutrality targets, because building in China accounts for roughly 25% of the energy, and it's still growing. And so then building and has the biggest potential to achieve net zero, but yet there's no target. The codes have not been updated, and so it could be in line to achieve that goal. We are doing that, right? We are updating codes, and doing disclosure, benchmarking, all these programs to make sure we can reach the goal. So that's the area we are currently also trying to work with our Chinese colleagues. So that's all the example I raised about the policy collaboration. And then second part is about some of the technology area. David, you already mentioned the area we can collaborate with them. You talk about the transportation, the renewables for sure, but I also want to mention the building and the area that California has been really leading in the U.S. And we have a lot of technology in the controls area, in the management area, and in a lot of these windows, a lot of these new innovation and technology coming from Silicon Valley. And so I think that's an area actually building mostly stay local. There's not much competition, right? The job stays there. If we do retrofits, energy efficiency, ESCOs, all of those, they stay in their own country. So there's a lot of area we can collaborate. I've led this U.S.-China Clean Energy Research Center on building energy efficiency. And that was a initiative started by the former Secretary Stephen Chu, and really meant to not just to have a scientific academic collaboration, but to have a real-world impact. How do we do that is through engagement with private sector. So that was a requirement. We have to work with the private sector. And we have all the U.S. companies, large companies, Dow Chemical and Johnson Control and the UTC, and then also on China side, their biggest companies engaged, working together and developing technologies, demonstrating those, and working together on policy. All the private sector companies were very engaged, and they really thought they really benefit from the collaboration. And one of the key benefits they felt, it was the market. So in terms of the collaboration between California and China market is huge, right? And they are at the economic level, and they could actually adopt really advanced technologies, and that U.S. companies also make. At the same time, if we can work with them on the code standards, so those technology could become more competitive in Chinese market. And so I think that's one of the really key benefits that our private sector really felt. And so that's why they were really engaged. And actually, when the program ended 2 years ago, they sent us a letter and want to continue the collaboration. But because of the U.S.-China relationship and got kind of tense, so it's discontinued. But we hope with this new Sunnyland announcement, we'll have more collaborations like this. And it looks like China and the U.S. already began government collaboration on CCS. And they're exploring mechanism like the CIRC model, at least for that. But I hope we can use that for more technology collaboration as well.
Yeah, thanks, Nan. I wanted to bring in Frank to this conversation. We've talked about U.S. technology going to China, finding markets. You're coming from a company that's trying to bring Chinese technology into the U.S. North American market. Can you tell us a little bit about those challenges as well as opportunities that you see?
Absolutely. And by the way, thanks for having me here today. It's quite a panel, and I sure appreciate being here. Well, we're kind of where the rubber meets the road, to use a cliche. I mean, we're a vehicle manufacturer. We're headquartered in China, but we have a fairly significant manufacturing presence here in California. And we're navigating the landscape of U.S. policy as it relates to, imports and electrification of the grid and even on the heavy-duty vehicle side. So for us, this is there's this high-level, discussion going on, but in some ways, for us, it's more of a shoe leather kind of thing. We, first of all, we have like I said, we have this manufacturing facility, but we recognized pretty early on that, it's not just good enough to have a manufacturing facility, that, we have to have Americans working there. And if we're going to have Americans working there, they should be union workers. And if we're going to have union workers there, well, then we should have the best, kind of agreement that we could possibly have. So, we implemented a community benefits agreement that was the first of its kind in the nation as it relates to people building electric vehicles and involved in the, electrification revolution. So we hire people, that have been in prison, people that are, maybe don't have the traditional skills that you would need to be in a manufacturing workforce. And in that way, we better our community. And by bettering our community, we're showing a face that hey, we're not just this, amorphous Chinese company coming over here to, steal some market share. We have an investment in our community, and we want to see the community grow as we do. We're very fortunate. First of all, Governor Newsom's visit just a couple weeks ago, during that visit, he came in, actually drove one of our cars. And when he was behind the wheel, he said he wanted two. So I guess that tells you something. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, I've thought about this a lot. I was at an Apec event on Monday night, and it was, there was a lot of folks from China there and a lot of folks from the U.S. there. And they had a band come and play at the end of this dinner. And the band played Hotel California. And it's like, this was really what the governor's engaging in. It's like Hotel California diplomacy, right? California is this really remarkable sort of beacon for how the rest of the United States can adopt these technologies. And I think because California doesn't look at China as an adversary, California sees China as a partner. And so if the U.S. can adopt this kind of a stance that, hey, we're partnering with China, and that these Chinese companies like ours are bringing innovation and technology to the U.S. to better lives, then we can, I think we can, cross this hump. Now it's I gotta say, that sounds really simple. But you go to Washington and walk down Cannon and Longworth and Rayburn and come back and walk them again and try to find 5 people who agree with that, and you'll be hard pressed to find those 5 people. Even Californians. I mean, we have local representatives like Eric Swalwell and John Garamendi are absolutely against Chinese companies like ours investing at all in the United States. So I'm going to go back to my original premise, and that is shoe leather. And in order to bring this innovation and to make a better world for us and for our kids, it's got to start with the shoe leather and just walking the halls and talking to people. And the thing that we do on top of all of that is we're extremely transparent. We have this factory, and there's all these people working there, and it's kind of in the middle of the desert. It's in Lancaster, California, which is the closest thing to Lancaster in terms of industry is prisons. There's 2 large prisons up there. So, but they're not transparent. Anybody, and I invite everyone here, you can call me up, I'll give you my business card. You can come and see what we do, and you can see how we do it, and you can see that it's an American company. And by the way, so I work for BYD, but we're spinning off this company called Ride, and that's just the extension of what I'm just talking about here. BYD stands for Build Your Dreams. We really believe that that's what we do. And RIDE stands for Real Innovation Delivered with Excellence, and that's what we believe the future is going to require. So, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. So I wanted to bring us back, since you also mentioned it, to Governor Newsom's recent visit to China. And there were a number of agreements that came out of this initiatives, following on, of course, of a very long history of MOUs between the state of California and various national as well as subnational entities in China. So I wanted to invite maybe David and Nan or others that to talk on what was accomplished in that visit, and what does it mean for California's green energy transition specifically?
Yeah, so very significant visit. This is, first of all, it's a big deal for any president of China to meet with a governor. That doesn't happen often. And this is the first trip by any governor since the pandemic to China. I think, the context here is that collectively we have to get comfortable with the reality with the relationship of China. It is a frenemy relationship. We are always going to have some economic tension, some military tension, and then climate and clean energy collaboration. And that part has to be there. I think the relationship between California and China is actually the most important relationship in the world for solving climate change. The ability to scale. If you just step back and look, we built here in this state the very first utility scale solar project, the first utility scale wind project, the first energy storage project, the first electric vehicle, the very first energy code and standard in the world was built here. China scaled those things better than anyone else in the world. And give China credit, because the cost of renewables and batteries and EVs would not be where it is without what China has done. So those two things put together are potent. And there's a lot of, my wife is Chinese. My wife's father's from Beijing. My wife's mother's from Hangzhou. There's been a lot of, tension with China. And, even here in California, some of the anti-Asian violence heating up. My wife was afraid to go outside at times with this stuff. And I think there's levels of tension that really need to be brought down. And I think this trip accomplished a lot. The governor was treated almost like a president going there. They shut off roads. They were incredibly welcoming of him and gracious. And, a number of sort of memorandums of understanding to work together on different areas. The one I'm probably most excited about is offshore wind, where we're going to be building out off the coast of California, 20 miles off, floating offshore wind capacity. And China has a lot to teach us about that. We were down in Jiangsu province, where they've done mostly offshore wind. And so that's the kind of thing that I think can be building blocks for the future. But there are other agreements signed. We are also doing a big push 30 by 30 to conserve land. The governor visited one of the biggest conservation sites there. We got to see what China's doing on that. So I think dialogue is good. I think it's necessary. I think it's needed more than ever right now to extend that hand of climate collaboration. No matter what the other tensions may be, we have to have that engagement. The absence of that creates huge problems. And so I think this was a very positive step. And I think it's even more positive that President Xi is here. That's a big deal as well. So I feel actually the last few months some real momentum, but I'd be curious on your take.
Yeah. So I think that I wasn't involved in a lot of those planning and for the visit, but I think that we probably are beneficiary from those because of those high-level commitment and MOUs being signed up. We as actually we're Department of Energy National Lab, but we are also managed by UC Berkeley, one of the UC campuses, right? So we're a California institution, and can help us really make like a lot of these commitment more real by collaborating on technology or research or analysis and many of those. So give meat to these MOUs and help it implement, whether it is a technical analysis to support the large-scale offshore wind, or whether it is about and using these demand response aggregation, new and solutions, and to help address China's peak load issue. Many of those areas, I think, opens that opportunities. At the same time, I want to concur what David said about the collaboration of bringing costs down, and the solar PV panel and many other technology are the same. They may be invented here because of the policy and we have here, and then through the collaboration, China was actually very aggressive in terms of testing and demonstrating those in their own facilities, much more than we do here, because we have a lot of private sector investment. People are not always willing to take those risks, right, to try those things. China's much more willing and to test those new technologies in buildings, in transportation, and in many of those areas. So through those validation testing they've done, and then also through their manufacturing capability, we're able to enjoy the low-cost solar, low-cost wind, and many of the technologies. And so, and I hope like with all these stringent collaboration that could be applied to more, the area we're facing costs kind of a barrier, challenges. And it's a challenging, daunting problem, and we never faced before, and we really have to collaborate. I heard from colleagues working in Silicon Valley in the clean tech investment community, how much they also enjoy the collaboration before, and because there was the investment funding coming in, again, in these relatively early stage technology that needs the validation, the tech to market effort, and because of a lack of communication or collaboration, those really slow down. Again, goes back to the risk issue, and there's value of death issue, and then the collaboration really helped to fill those gaps in the past, but it's a slowdown in the last number of years. And so, and I hope through these newly kind of renewed and established MOUs, collaboration between California and the many Chinese provinces, we can have more of those collaboration. We don't have to always try to compete in the same area. We each have an area, we have strengths, like you mentioned about high-speed rail. They are more advanced, right? Many last 20, 30 years, they've been building so much more roads, bridges, and the railways and highways, and then they have a lot of those experience. And so that's maybe the area we can learn from them. And then we have a lot of the area David mentioned, and they can learn from us. And I want to also quickly, I remember the one area is construction. We have a significant housing shortage issue, right? The labor shortage and the material shortage and all of those. And China actually, and in the last 10, 20 years, developed this prefabricated building, industrialized construction, and industry through their centralized and policy. They just they can mandate and 10%, 20% or 30% building to be built that way, because they were also going through the mass and production to meet the growing demand because of the urbanization and all of those. So we could actually learn also, again, from them and in the industrialized construction. I know California now just began looking into that modular homes, right, through that, because we can build a building much faster using that way. We've seen this video, and the Chinese company built 57-story building in 12 days, right? And they put together, during the pandemic, the hospital and for the quarantine in Wuhan, and 1,000 beds in 10 days, right? And we have a lot of these kind of heat, whether it's a wildfire or earthquake, we need to rebuild quick and high quality. And so that's kind of the method you can use, and then you can incorporate efficient envelope, window, everything there at the same time, and lowering the cost significantly as well. So just to give the example, actually, we can really benefit through a lot of these collaboration.
Yeah. So those are really good examples, and I wanted to pick up on one thing that you mentioned, Nan, which is that there are areas where maybe the U.S. and China wouldn't directly compete because there are some respective advantages. But there is an area where U.S., well, specifically Californian firms and Chinese firms are directly competing, which is electric vehicles. And right now, Tesla is engaging a global price war, which is having ripples across the entire electric vehicle industry. And so I would love to understand, well, first off, how is that competition going? Is it a level playing field? What would it take to make a level playing field, and what's at stake for consumers to achieve some kind of healthy competition in this space where there are firms competing head to head?
You're looking at me.
I'm looking at you, but we can go down the panel. But yeah, I'm gonna start with you, Frank.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yes, we're in the same space as Tesla. I don't think we like to look at it as competition as much as we like to look at it as a collaboration. I mean, our technology is growing their technology. There's, we have things in common. Tesla builds in China. I think their largest factory is in China. And there are occasions when we've supplied them batteries and other items for the vehicle. So it's not really a competition as much as it's a collaboration, and it's because this, there's this huge thing hanging out there that, that we all need to address, and the elephant in the room is climate, and until we can, get to the point where, where it's 100% of new vehicles are EVs, and not just cars, but buses and trucks and forklifts and in ships even, our globe is going to be significantly changed, and so that's how we approach this. We never think of this as a competition at all, more of collaboration. So obviously, there are policies that make it more difficult for Chinese firms to operate in the U.S. and there probably are policies in China that make it difficult for U.S. firms to establish their foothold there. There's everything, traditional protectionism like tariffs are in place on both sides, and, sometimes non-traditional, barriers are in place too. So, I think on the U.S. side, because that's what I'm most familiar with, and it's the way to address this is one, through policy, and California is again a great example of how policy can address some of this. Having policies that require advanced clean fleets, having policies that require companies that manufacture vehicles to have clean vehicles in their line of offerings are things that are going to accelerate this. And it's not really a zero-sum thing, right? There's not just one company that can do this. Everybody's got to pitch in and do it. So I think that's really the way to look at this is more along the lines of that kind of collaboration instead of a competition.
Yeah, thanks. Any other thoughts?
I just wanted to chime in. You mentioned the 100% zero-emission vehicle goal. I am thrilled that we're here in San Francisco. I'm a native San Franciscan. It's great to have Apec here. But if I could pick another place to do next, I would have everybody go to Norway. I was in Norway in June. They're at 90% of new vehicle sales being electric. You walk around downtown Oslo, and it's silent. Actually, it's really interesting. We were so focused on climate pollution, but just the reduction in noise pollution and what that does for your psyche is remarkable. And then it's things, they're doing street construction equipment. So cranes, bulldozers, dump trucks, all electric. And then they've done a big push on making things pedestrian friendly. We were there with a delegation of 7 states working on offshore wind, and for the first 4 days of all of our meetings, we didn't get in a car. We just walked everywhere. And it felt like walking 15 years into the future, but that kind of future, getting that many electric vehicles to supplant ICE vehicles, I mean, that requires China and the United States and China and California to bring that forward.
Yeah, I just remember, and some years ago, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, when the U.S. and China are Commerce Secretary, TDA head, and having a negotiation with China on tariff related to clean tech. And I was invited as one of the 2 scientists from the U.S. to join. I met with the Premier Wang Yang, and then in the room. And so they want us to really show the role of clean technologies and in meeting many kind of multiple objectives, energy security, or and for creating jobs and many of those benefits. And they wanted to use those and the more science-based kind of information to have a negotiation on tariff for each other, right? To maybe reduce and that to make the trade easier. So I don't know. I'm just I don't represent the LBL this moment. My personal view, if there could be some trade deal like that for the clean tech for climate change, that's our common challenge. It's a global issue. It's costly. Only through collaboration we can bring those barrier, kind of bring the cost down and remove the barrier. I hope there could be some deals made lowering both sides and make it a level playing field and in many of the areas.
Great, thanks. So I think now is time to give you a chance. You all have been patiently listening to us. Give you a chance to raise some questions. And I need to note that David and Nan need to leave a little early because of a prior engagement. But let's open up the floor for questions.
Question is for David and for all of you. For offshore wind, one of the things that I had been understanding is, wind is created from the differential between the ocean and the interior heat. And with the ocean rising, the temperature of the ocean, can you talk about, is wind going to be sustainable? Is it a good use right now for renewable energy?
Yeah, so just generally, for a little bit of context, the wind resource offshore is far superior to the wind resource on land. So the metric we use is called capacity factor. It's roughly the percentage of the hours in the day when turbines are spinning. So on land in California, it's about 40%. Offshore, it's closer to 55, 60%. The turbines are also much, much bigger. So when you're driving around the United States and you see a wind turbine, the gating item on the size of the turbine is the ability to fit a blade on a truck. So typically you see turbines, they're about 2 megawatts in size. Offshore wind is now at 18 megawatts. So one rotation of one of those turbines, which has about 12 rotations a minute, one rotation powers 2 houses for a day. Okay, the swept area is equivalent to 10 football fields. So, and we're siting these very, very far offshore, as far as 60 miles offshore of California. So the climate will be changing. Sea level will go up to some degree. We hope it will go up less because we're transitioning to clean energy. I don't think wind is going to slow down. It may change directions and so forth, but we're always going to have some degree of wind. And one of the great innovations in wind is the ability to operate at both much lower speeds and much higher speeds than ever before. So these things operate through hurricanes, and that's a big part of the reason we're going big on that.
If you had the opportunity to have President Xi and President Biden together and raise the question of how can we increase trust between our countries, not on the political side, but in the commercial side? What could each party do to improve trust in the relationships? And I'll give you a moment of background, which is I used to work with intellectual property and technology transfer, work with national labs. So I have some history, and I've certainly read media about reasons why we don't trust each other commercially. And with your company, you've got intellectual property patents and all this sort of stuff going on. That's one aspect of trust, but maybe you could address the question more broadly in how we can improve trust between ourselves.
Me? I can start one quick comment. I think if similar to people, right, when we want to make friends, one, we need to be transparent. And so that's step two, we need to let ourselves vulnerable to each other, right? So I think it's similar to that. I think transparency is very important. So in that case, some of, I think the trust loss may be due to not understanding each other, because maybe there's no data available. We don't know what's behind the scenes and what's going on. So I do think that and transparency is one area, and if there's something could be done, and it will help and increase the trust. And I won't touch the vulnerability, but then there's also respect. And so respecting and each other's and the view and the value, there's a disagreement, we respect, we agree on disagreement, and but work out some common framework so we can respect intellectual property, like each country's. And so that's just some quick thoughts related to that.
I mean, I would echo that 100%. Transparency is so critical. We found that within our community, where we have this large facility, that the best way that we can, work with folks in the community is to be transparent, have them come in and see what we do, have a better understanding of, both the workers that are there and the managers and the engineers, and. I really think that's really insightful. I was kind of like fumbling with this. And then number two that you mentioned, and I also agree with, is respect. I think that, respect is one of those things that they always say, you have to earn respect. And yet, I think it's a two-way street, right? You can't earn respect unless you give respect. So it's a very fraught relationship because the use of the word trust here, right? And how do you get to the point where you are transparent and you do have respect without trust? When do we, open up our coats and become more vulnerable to one another? And imagine that's not something that's going to happen overnight. Not going to happen because our two presidents, were speaking and shaking hands today. But I think it's just going to have to develop naturally.
Mm-hmm. I was going to add, first of all, thank you for the question. That's a brave question and a really important question. I was going to add, I think just speaking for what President Biden can do since we're here in the United States, I think two things. One is to be explicit about calling out the incredible contributions of Chinese Americans to our society. I did a panel with Steve Chu on Monday, Nobel laureate, energy secretary, ran the National Lab, and across the whole clean energy innovation space, amazing entrepreneurship, leadership, in really helping the whole clean energy sector grow and so many other parts of American society. And I think calling that out in particular is really helpful. The other thing, I just think we forget history. I mean, the United States and China teamed up together to defeat Imperial Japan in World War II, which had committed some of the worst atrocities of the war. Unit 731 and what they did to the Chinese people, the whole Nanjing and all of the rest. And that was a collective effort that was successful. And I think we kind of need to draw on that history because climate change is now presenting a threat that's equally as dire, and recall that. And so finding ways to bring that back into our collective memory, I think, would be really helpful.
Thank you so much for a very interesting panel. We have heard a lot of informative discussion this evening about opportunities in the power sector, opportunities in the transportation sector, opportunities in the building sector. We have not heard a lot about opportunities in the industrial sector. As China is the world's leading industrial nation, I was hoping that the panelists might be willing to comment on opportunities for collaboration in industrial activity. And there's one in particular that I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on, which is that, California has played this really catalytic role in all of these other sectors in developing policies and technologies and demonstrating their feasibility so that they can be scaled in China and around the world. And the cement industry, it's only about 1% of California's emissions, but it's about 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which makes it almost as much as all passenger road transportation. So what can we do to collaborate on this critical material? And because success here will be as important as all the electric vehicles everywhere on the roads.
So we're funding some activities in low carbon cement, companies like Blue Planet here in the Bay Area and others. I will say industrial decarbonization is really tough. It's, I think, among the hardest areas to decarbonize, but there's definitely some bright spots there. And there are also some bright spots in the decarbonization of food production. I visited a company earlier this week that's doing coffee bean roasting and transitioning from natural gas to doing all electric. Great innovation that is scaling. So we have, probably a couple $100 million, $200 million or so we're spending just on industrial decarbonization. But I mean, you're in industry. I mean, what are your thoughts, Frank?
I just love that question, and I just think I really think it comes down to international accord and policy, and because policy is what drives this. If there's no policy in place and there's no incentive to decarbonize, then a lot of folks just won't do it. And because they see it as an advantage or an edge or some impingement upon their God-given right to do things the way they want to do it. And so I think all of this comes down to that, right? Accord, and policy, and without accord, I think you still have to have the policy, that all comes back to California, right? Everything starts here. It does, and it's nice to know that we have some green cement happening, some incentivization there, and maybe steel is next.
I would note that I think the policy discussion is going to be quite different across the industrial decarb because the sectors are so different. You mentioned cement, which is, of course, not an internationally traded commodity and thus doesn't bring with it a lot of the baggage that you would have with other products like steel. So I think if you had the steel conversation, I think you'd be talking a lot about the border carbon adjustment debate that's happening, how to set those rules to properly incentivize companies in China to become zero carbon, and what is the scope for technology cooperation, given that this is now on the radar of respective national governments. Cement, it might be an interesting example where, because it doesn't touch on as many of these other fraught parts of the relationship, and maybe there is a tech and scale-up kind of dimension to it as well, plus the CCUS component, if that's included in it, which is now officially on the table with respect to U.S.-China collaboration. So I think there's some interesting opportunities, but I think they'll be quite heterogeneous across the different sectors. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much,
Yes.
everybody.
Yeah.
All right, appreciate it. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Very good to see you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
you.
Okay, so I think we had questions on the row here. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
The issue I wanted to bring up was that we are making lithium-ion batteries for power storage and also for the electric vehicles. How much study and what we have done as per our study, what will happen to those batteries once they're not usable? Are they recyclable? Where we dump them? Would there be a future for that? What kind of environmental pollution they create? Have you ever shed any light on that subject?
Sure. Well, so first of all, we make actually lithium iron phosphate batteries, which are slightly different than lithium iron. So they're non-toxic. But most importantly, there is a life cycle, right? There's a duty cycle. So, we like to think that a battery in a vehicle can last 8 to 10 to 12 years. And that, what happens after that? Well, first thing, and I think the most important thing, is storage. You can extend a battery's life by 20 to 30 years just by, stacking them into storage containers and then using some of this renewable energy to, pump those containers up. And I do think that is, the next step in the life. And finally, in our batteries anyway, you can, once they've reached the end of their usable life, you can extract the materials and find ways to reuse them either in batteries or in other ways. And so that's how we see the life cycle with our batteries and the chemistry that we're using.
I have a question regarding the building of the wind off of California. We notice we're having problems already in the East Coast with the sonar development and the beaching of the right whales and dolphins. Are we going to have the same problem with California? The gray whales migrate back and forth for breeding, so building 60 miles offshore will be in the path of the migration of many animals. So are we going to be seeing beaching of animals due to the sonar and the drilling and everything, which we did not have with oil drilling off the coast of California?
Well, I'm not qualified.
I wish David were here because I'm sure that there's, I'm quite confident there's quite a bit of effort looking at this problem. Certainly in the East Coast, which was had some earlier stage offshore wind development, there was a lot of focus on the impacts of those on marine life. But in terms of specifically going out that far, I can't really say, but maybe we could follow up with David afterwards about what kind of environmental studies that are being taken place by the state government.
Many panels here today actually have some direct experience in China. So based on your assessment, based on your understanding about China, do you think ordinary people, including the business owner, do they really care about the climate change? Or they really worry more about the more urgent issue, daily life, more economic growth? Do they really care about the climate change?
Well, I'm not going to speak for 1.4 billion people, but I will say that the policy signals in the long run are quite clear and unambiguous of both countries, but particularly if you look at China. The medium term, there are other pressing challenges. We talked about some issues with coal buildouts in China. Certainly, energy security and reliability is a huge priority for governments as well as people, and that's going to be a really important challenge to try to square with with our climate change mitigation goals. And there are opportunities to do that, and I'd say that's probably one area where California could actually provide a lot of really useful insights to China in order to address some of these pressing issues which do touch daily life, particularly thinking about China's major power shortages 2 years ago, which touched over 20 provinces and in some cases put residential consumers without power. So I think there's quite a bit there that needs to be done in order to accomplish all of those goals of energy security and climate change, as well as economic growth. And I think that's a challenge that all countries are going to be facing.
You noted at the beginning of the program that there's this Sunnylands agreement that was announced yesterday that has some major implications for China climate cooperation. For those of us who maybe weren't keeping tabs as closely as some others in the room. It'd be great to hear your take on sort of what was this, what are its implications, maybe what's the opportunity presented here, and what are maybe some of the challenges of realizing that opportunity?
Professor question.
Oh, do you want to? I swear this wasn't a plant, but yes, nice to see you. This dropped late. This dropped last night, so all of us in the field were furiously reading it and comparing it with all previous agreements and doing all sorts of. So the hot takes are on Twitter, I guess X now, but then you'll see probably more analysis coming out. I think it picks up the torch of the Glasgow Agreement and other previous statements. It adds some new dimensions on methane, which has been an important component of U.S. climate diplomacy, and China is drafting and implementing a national methane strategy, which is a good fraction of their greenhouse gas emissions in addition to CO2. All non-CO2 gases will be in the 2035 NDCs. Those are the commitments to the Paris Agreement, which was ambiguous before. And then we also saw a couple of new things, some introduction of some language around power sector emissions, absolute power sector emissions reductions following peaking, which is a deftly worded statement, which would somehow imply that there will be a reduction in peaking and then a reduction in carbon emissions from power sectors in China as a result of renewables build out and decreased coal use in the power sector. And then we also saw a language on CCUS and cooperative projects on CCUS, which is quite interesting and promising given the need to really demonstrate this technology at scale if we want to be able to deploy it before mid-century. There's a subnational summit that's been proposed, I guess potentially next year, and certainly that California would be really interesting to include in that. And there's a bunch of details on the Conference of the Parties meeting for the UN. The conference is going to be held very soon around global stocktake. So what is the cumulative ambition of all countries party of Paris Agreement? How short are we of the 1.5 degree Celsius goal? So quite a bit in there.
Earlier you have mentioned that in China, you don't see them as competitors, you see them as collaborators or partners. And I was just curious, what are some areas that you feel your company can really highlight or benefit, or Tesla could benefit from learning?
Benefit from, pardon me?
From learning from your company.
Oh, where they can benefit from us or we can benefit from them?
Either way, mainly where they can benefit from you and your insights.
Well, Tesla is such a great company. It's hard to say that they can benefit from us. I think that for us, marketing is I think Tesla's strength. And as you see, I'm in communications and I oversee some marketing, and I could sure learn a lot about how to do better marketing, I guess. The thing is that we are very, very, very much don't really see this at all. And I'll emphasize it again, like a competition, but we really do see it like a collaboration. I mean, if you wanted the benefits, we're learning from them, how to make cars go better or farther or the batteries last longer. And they're learning some of the same things from us. There's so much, data that electric vehicles generate in the way that your phone does, like how fast you walk or how fast you drive. So I imagine that at the end of the day, we're learning how to do this at scale and in a way that's beneficial for the consumer.
For the better part of 25 years, WTO member states have been complaining about how China, the CCP effectively picked its winners, funded them, eliminated the competition, et cetera. Now the IRA and the BIL legislation does some of that. And I'm wondering in academia, is this considered a good move on behalf of governments? We see Germany starting to do some of this, European countries. And I'm just curious, what are we saying in academia? Thank you.
Well, it depends on which corner of academia you talk to. Dyed in the wool trade economists will never agree with that. But I think we see a different evolution of academics that are focused on addressing climate change and clean energy, which have come to embrace some of the benefits of industrial policy. And so, I mean, several examples. A bunch of us, none of which is a formal economist by name, wrote a piece in Foreign Affairs a few years ago saying industrial policy is where we need to go, before all of these new legislation had come into play, because of all of the difficult issues of making pure economic instruments work, just a pure carbon tax or pure cap and trade or what have you, because of some of the really difficult externalities that in terms of technologies, et cetera, that need to be addressed. I sense that the dyed in the wool trade economists are still upset about how all of these things violate W2 rules. I don't think that is making anyone in Washington lose sleep. And I think there's a lot of other folks that are thinking pragmatically, how do you use this renewed focus on industrial policy to create as much benefits as we can and deploy them as fast as we can, while also limiting the downsides. And the downsides could be consumers losing access to products that they would otherwise have, a lower cost. I would love to have a $20,000 electric vehicle on the market in the United States. We don't have that right now, but you have that in the United States. You have that in China. You have that in Europe. So we have to think carefully about how to structure these policies so as not to make it too onerous on consumers to actually deploy these products that we need in order to achieve climate change goals. And I think there are quite a few folks thinking very intelligently about that question in academia.
The offshore windmills, I did see in Denmark quite a bit, and there was a question about the environmental effect and on wildlife, or ocean life. I was wondering there may be something to learn from them about the effect on whale migration and or any other life.
Well, certainly the Danish have been the pioneers in wind technology, definitely punching over the weight with respect to the size of their power grid and their economic size of the clean tech sector. So I think we're all really benefiting from those early Danish experiences. The challenge, and probably why California is not just going to the North Sea to think about these questions, but also going to China, is that the North Sea is perhaps the easiest place in the world to deploy offshore at scale, because it's very shallow depths. You have essentially 3 different giant land masses that it can connect to, and thus very easy to interconnect and deal with a lot of those challenges. And when we move to, for example, offshore California, the seafloor is very deep. We're talking about going over very large distances. There's a whole nother mess of engineering, technical challenges. And so that's, I think, something where bringing in China's expertise could be very valuable. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is a really interesting panel.